Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. I'm Eduardo Quay. My guest today is a leading specialist on Germany. Jacqueline Hénard is a former correspondent in Paris for the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung and other newspapers. She currently heads the Paris Bureau of Communications Network Consulting, an international management consulting firm specializing in strategic communications. Ms. Hénard is the author of numerous books on Germany and Europe, including What Does Germany Think About Europe, published in 2011, and A Certain Idea of France, published last year. Welcome to France 24, Ms. Hénard, who joins us from Berlin. Well, we saw a very impressive victory yesterday, a very impressive personal victory by Mrs. Merkel. She almost did what nobody since Konrad Adenauer has done in 1957, which is to have an absolute majority in parliament. So now she has to find a coalition partner, always a very difficult thing in German politics. What is your reading of what she may do in order to get a coalition, and is this going to take a long time, as has sometimes been the case?
Well, negotiations are never very simple, and I think for both potential coalition partners, the SPD, the Social Democrats, or the Greens, would be very painful to enter into a coalition with the CDU from their current position. As you said, the CDU just barely missed the absolute majority, which would have been a very slim majority, but during the night, at some point, you had the feeling they would have 1 or 2 seats majority in parliament. Now, both SPD and Greens are not as strong as they would have hoped to be after the elections. The SPD is now in a position where they would be a junior partner in the coalition. The last grand coalition 8 years ago, both parties had about the same strength. Now, the CDU gained many points, almost 42%, and the SPD is at 25.5%. So the size is quite different, and they could not claim to be as strong as CDU in their negotiations.
Well, do you think it's? Do you think the SPD has any interest in joining a coalition, given that past history has shown that junior coalition partners don't do so well?
Well, they don't do so well. It's not always true. One of the former very strong figures in the SPD, Franz Müntefering, said it's not good to be in the opposition. Opposition ist Miss. It's a mess. It's very difficult to become stronger in the opposition. So obviously, it is not in their. They would have preferred to be in a stronger position for the negotiations, and they would certainly have preferred to be in a position to govern the country. This is not. It's not true. It has not. The voters have decided otherwise. So now they have to come to terms with the situation, and they will have to negotiate. Obviously, Per Steinbrück, who was the head of list for the SPD, already in the discussions last night, he said, it's not our problem, the coalition. The problem is on Mrs. Merkel's side. She has to find a partner, which is very true. But I would imagine that the SPD, in the long run, they would rather prefer to be in government than outside.
And what kind of demands do you think the SPD would make on Mrs. Merkel? The two parties seem to be relatively on the same line concerning Europe, concerning the euro crisis, but there are very serious differences on economic and taxation matters, internal German economic and taxation matters.
Well, probably taxation is going to be a very difficult subject during the negotiations, because this is where the SPD and the CDU are really on different planets. Their clients are different, their electorate is different, and they would expect, on the one hand, to introduce a wealth tax, to tax high earners more severely, and on the other hand, on the, what was it, which you said, the
the minimum wage is a big...
And the minimum wage, yes, well, that is, the negotiations will be difficult, but I think that basically both the CDU and the SPD agree that there should be a minimum wage. The SPD is was more dynamic in asking for the minimum wage, and the CDU sort of stole the subject from the SPD's program.
Well, do you think that she could turn to the Greens? The relationships have not been so great with the Greens, but since Mrs. Merkel decided to move away from nuclear power, the two parties seem to be a little bit closer together. Is that an alternative for her?
I think you cannot exclude the possibility of a black-green government, black being CDU and the Greens green. I think both are possible. The Green Party would have more difficulty entering into a coalition with the CDU, but basically it might be a great temptation for them to participate in power. They have entered the political arena of the adults, so to speak, after the elections in Baden-Württemberg, where they now, one of the prime ministers, the Ministerpräsidenten in the Länder, is a Green, Winfried Kretschmann, and he is very well. He gets along very well with the industry in his area, and he is very well accepted by, he's a very calm person. In the Bundesrat, this is not a very restless situation. So I think you cannot exclude, for the time being, a black-green coalition.
Okay. Well, one of the surprises, perhaps the biggest surprise, in fact, yesterday, was the new party that was just formed in February, the Alternative for Germany party, an anti-Euro, anti-Europe party, and they almost got that 5% threshold that would have allowed them to go into parliament. They didn't. But do you see this party as creating some problems for Mrs. Merkel in the months ahead, particularly in the European elections next year?
I think it is quite a challenge. I would not say that the party is anti-Europe. It has nothing to do with the UKIP or with the anti-European parties in France, or the Eurosceptic parties in France. Many of its members, many of its leading personnel, they are from the traditional political movements. Why is the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, so strong? I think the reasons are more complex than simply the euro. I would say that the weakness of the FDP and some last-minute problems for on the Green side also contributed to the strength of the Alternative für Deutschland in the elections, in yesterday's elections.
Okay, we're running a little bit out of time, but I do want to ask you, there have been calls over the last several months from various places in Europe, various European countries that would like Germany to take more of a leadership role, certainly in Germany, but also in the world, also in situations such as the Syrian crisis. Mrs. Merkel seems very hesitant to do so. Do you think that might change now that she's been re-elected?
I think that this is something that will change over time, whoever will be the next chancellor. Now, in this case, it is going to be Mrs. Merkel. Germany has great difficulty adapting to its new role in Europe. It is in a position of force that it has not aspired for, and it is in a position that it has not really thought. There is the intellectual dimension, the intellectual justification of its force today is not there. Germany has difficulty defining its leadership from inside. And from the outside also, expectations are a bit contradictory. So I think this is a process in the making. even if Germany's behavior in these last months, over the last months on the international scene, has been very deceiving.
Okay, well, thank you so
disappointing.
much.
Sorry, that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Hénard, joining us from Berlin. Thank you for being on the France 24 interview. And please do stay tuned for more news in English, French, and Arabic.